Listen. I've always loved the sound of the sea. The endless rhythm and the way it changes with every tide. Like many musicians before me, I find inspiration in the natural world. And I make recordings to help me remember how different places make me feel. Every landscape has its own sound, and each and every one of these sounds is as precious to me as the image itself. The way that the echo of a wave hangs in the air long after the wave itself has receded. Music and stories have that same power, and there is an ocean of stories in this stretch of water that flows between Scotland and Ulster. This is the North Channel, and from here on the Mull of Kintyre, on the west coast of Scotland, it's only a short journey over to Torhead in County Antrim. There's only 12 miles or so between us, but I want to find out more about an interconnected history that has always intrigued me. I've crossed this sea road many, many times, but this time I'm crossing in search of inspiration for a new piece of music that I hope will capture the sounds and the stories of this narrow sea. Stories of the travellers who came before me, the Scots, the Irish, the Ulster-Scots, and the human connections that happened because of the movement of people from one place to another. Like so many, I'm leaving home behind me, not knowing who I'll meet or what I'll find on that farther shore.
WSM Nashville. Now, from America's Music City. WSM Nashville.
My musical adventures have taken me round the world and back again. A few years ago, I made a TV series about the tunes and songs that crossed from Scotland to Ulster to become a vital part of the traditional music of both Ireland and America. Making that film, I followed the music. This morning in Kintyre, making field recordings on Dunaverty Beach, I'm following in the footsteps of royalty. On the run from the English, Robert the Bruce escaped from here to Ulster to gather his courage and the comrades who would help him claim Scotland's throne. When St. Columba landed here from Ulster in the 6th century, he brought Christianity to Scotland. Saints and kings have played their part in the shaping of history, but so have the comings and goings of ordinary folks. Migration has always been a part of our shared story. I'm taking to the water for the first of what will be a number of research trips across the North Channel, following one of the oldest and shortest sea routes between these islands. From Campbelltown, the crossing to Antrim was a journey that kith and kin on both shores did for centuries.
Belfast Coast Guard, Ulster Explorer, Belfast Coast Guard, Channel 6 Belfast Coast Guard, this is Ulster Explorer leaving now, 2 crew, 3 passengers, approximately 90.
Although a ferry still runs during the summer months, the trip these days is mostly for tourists. My skipper is Brian McLernan from County Antrim. He knows this crossing well, and while it may be short, he never takes this stretch of water lightly. We left Campbelltown and it was a fine day, and we hit the middle of the narrow sea and suddenly the mist came down and we could see absolutely nothing.
Well, I don't know that was Scotch mist or Irish mist.
Or a blend. Yeah, it was just I couldn't believe how unpredictable that it was.
Very unpredictable, you just don't know. And then because you have the whole Atlantic Ocean sitting out there and it's different temperature, and then all of a sudden it meets this land and fog banks just appear.
If you were in a rowing boat with all your worldly possessions crammed around you, trying to row from Scotland to Ireland to start a new life, it must have been terrifying.
Of course it was terrifying. Well, it was hard life, you know, but like everyone else then, I suppose they knew no better, and that's just what they had to do, it had to be done.
Betwixt and between Scotland and Ulster is the island of Rathlin, another spot long associated with Robert the Bruce.
This is where Robert the Bruce came in and sat and watched the spider. And the beauty of it is it's a good lesson. Anybody nowadays, if at first you don't succeed, try again. And just don't give up on the first attempt. Try it.
The only time I was ever on Rathlin, I was visiting friends. And we went down and we got onto the ferry, and I've never in my life been so terrified. The waves were about 20, 30 feet above us.
It can be frightening. It is a horrifying experience at times. This particular place is just known as McDonald's Race because when you get a fast flow of water, it's known as a race. A family of 4 brothers went over to Islay to sell grain and get other goods that they needed. And on the way back, they hit a very bad piece of fast water, and the boat sunk on them, and the 4 brothers were down, so they just christened after it. Nowadays, we've plenty of power, but we still have to give their sea a lot of respect. Mainly it's tourism now, especially a lot of ones now go to the island of Islay because of its distilleries.
Why would they want to go to a distillery?
I don't know.
One of my thoughts today has been, I recognise the rocks. I see them, you know, as being the same rocks as home, just following the different 45 degrees.
Yeah, exactly. It's just the tide battering them
and you know, you could almost imagine that you could squeeze them together like a jigsaw and it would just fit back together again.
But it's maybe a good thing to keep that bit of water between us.
It's not just the geology that's the same. I think the people are very similar.
Yeah, but that's why we've that Ulster-Scots accent at the top of the Ulster-Scots. I actually live near to Glasgow, probably to do to Belfast.
Yes,
as the crow flies.
Shaped by ice and fire, Antrim's granite and limestone coast makes for a dramatic landscape. A land of giants where Finn McCool allegedly outwitted his Scottish rival, Ben Donner. That's what they tell you in Ulster anyway. In fact, this unique landscape helped to create a maritime kingdom that encompassed both sides of the North Channel. Broadcaster Laura Spence has a wealth of knowledge of the connections between us.
You need to consider the geography of the area. If you're in Kintyre or Islay or anywhere in Argyll, there's a great mountain range behind you, almost like an inaccessible spine. Similarly over here in Ulster, the great sweeping glens of Antrim and the inaccessible Antrim Plateau would cut off this part of northeast Ulster as well. And so for generations, for centuries, the people in northeast Ulster and the people in southwest Scotland considered themselves to be one kingdom, the kingdom of Dalriada, and they were a maritime, seagoing people. So they thought nothing of getting into boats and just heading off across the water.
We're standing here in front of Red Bay Castle with Scotland in the background, the castle standing guard over this coastline. What is the story of this castle?
It was the Bissett family who built the original castle that stood here at Red Bay. And the Bissets were probably Anglo-Normans, but they made a big name for themselves in Scotland. And then, of course, there was a murder. There's always a murder, isn't there? And they were banished from Scotland and told to go on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. So they came here. But as we came down through the centuries, the male line died out, and there was only Marjorie Bissett left. And at this point, a big family comes into the story. The MacDonalds, who were the lords of Dooniveg, this powerful mercenary chieftain clan from Scotland. And John Moore MacDonald, punching a little bit above his weight perhaps, married Marjorie Bissett. So the MacDonalds, they now become big players on the Ulster stage, and they're here to this day.
How important did the MacDonald family become in this area?
The MacDonalds were hugely significant politically and culturally, and in terms of their kingdoms in Islay and also here. You know, you find them cropping up again and again. They were canny. If there's going to be a conflict, they managed to have MacDonalds on both the winning side and the losing side.
There's not a lot left of the MacDonald's castle at Red Bay, but their stronghold at Dunluce gives a much better sense of the ambition of this Scottish clan. It's hard to believe that right under my feet are the remains of a market town built in the early 17th century by Scottish settlers. The MacDonalds encouraged families to relocate to Ulster, and there were more than 40 homes built here. The community had a church and a jail and a brew house, all the things you'd need for a prosperous town of the period. After its cobbled streets and its stone houses were destroyed in time of rebellion, nature has reclaimed the site, masking all trace of the families who once crossed the narrow sea to seek a new home here. The sea haze comes down so quickly. An hour ago I could see Scotland and Rathlin Island to the east. Now I can see nothing but the ruins of the MacDonalds' once mighty fortress rising out of the mist. The stories of powerful families like theirs were recorded, became part of history. The lives of the common folk were rarely marked. But they too live on, in the songs of the people. I'm reminded of an old Scots Gaelic song that's an old favourite of mine. It was last collected in the 30s on Rathlin by Ulster's great song hunter, Sam Henry. I recorded it back in the 70s. It's a song of the sea that's loved and shared on both shores.
Stryk mi shouting on grogezartje, jachem feik mi verwate, an chigunju, non chigumarach, smorchigu.
Starting a project like this can be quite daunting because unlike writing music for film, with this I'm looking at a blank canvas and all I have is a film in my head or a scene in my head. But I learned a long time ago that rather than staring at the empty page is to throw something onto it. Even if you just tip over the paint, you know, and it lands on it, but it gives you something to say, that's good, or that's not good. So rather than staring, I just start playing. Fare thee well, love, where'er ye be, a blessing for a boatman, far fae hame. I'm out here in my favourite place. I sit out here in the porch very often when I'm writing music. It's nice to see the scenery here. The cat occasionally joins me to help with the contemplations. But right now, I'm struggling with an idea that I have, and I hope I can pull it off. But while we were sailing from Campbelltown to Ballycastle, we were heading for Rathlin, and we encountered some pretty heavy turbulence, so much so that the captain and his two crew members were having in a huddle saying, I think we should go back. But they told me it was a place called MacDonald's Race, this particular bit of water, and it's where two tides meet. But I fancied the image of, you know, a current coming from one end, you know, flowing down from one place, and the current minding its own business, coming the other way. And then suddenly they meet each other, and then it all starts to get a little bit uncomfortable. So I'm trying to write a piece of music that is in two time signatures, and the two time signatures play across each other. But there'll be two melodies, one in one time signature, one in another, and they'll be played separately, and then I'll pull them together at MacDonald's Race. So that's what the current thought pattern is. I just can't find the two rhythms that I want to use yet. That could be a start for MacDonald's Race. So much about that, you know, the coming together of Scotland and Ireland, the coming together of the tides In my mind, it's symbolic. But let's see how we go. There's another sound I want to capture. The creaking, splashing rhythm that's been marking out the miles between us for centuries. These coastal roars race through water once crossed for cattle markets and church services, wakes and weddings, and of course, for the fishing. But wee boats carried more than fish between these shores.
Right, off we go.
Right, and take us away, Lawrence.
The Gaelic language came to Scotland from Ireland. And in time, the Scots tongue came to Ulster. In one of the biggest European migrations of the 17th century, lowland Scots crossed this sea road in their thousands. They became known as the Ulster-Scots, adding their own flavour to the songs and speech of the people here.
Wee weaver birdie, wings skilt o'er continents, aback o' hooses, happed in summer sky, o'er was and girdens, saft body, low a bean, bake aye appin, catches midgies, swallies wee musy fleas, gang fat on sang stir, spiels high, gars magic speck and doggerels on a bean, his wee quill scobes ne'er forgot.
For hundreds of years, poetry was a part of Ulster Scots community life. Al Miller's award-winning poem celebrates its past and signals its revival. The Ulster Scots language seems to be very connected to nature and the landscape. Do you find that the rhythm of it, a lot of the words are onomatopoeic, do you find that it provides you with a much wider palette of colour to use when you're creating poetry?
It is just a very rich, different language from English, and it takes you in a completely different direction when you're composing, putting the words, the pieces of the puzzle of a poem together. My poem, Wee Weaver Birdie, tried to capture some of the fleeting aspects of the tradition of Ulster Scots writing in Ulster. Going back since about 1750, there's been people of every generation, a very small number, who fell in love with the language and who used it. The poem was my attempt to try to grasp that fleeting nature of the Ulster Scots poetic tradition here, but also try to catch the vitality in the present of it as well, in the form of the wee weaver birdie flying about, just to try to come at it in a completely different way. The area of East Donegal that I was from, Lagan Valley, is steeped in Ulster Scots, and I had an appreciation of language. It didn't immediately blossom into a love of poetry, that came later. It's a voyage of discovery in the language that starts parochial and then widens out. As the years have gone by, my interest in Ulster Scots language and poetry has just increased. It's a compelling passion now.
I've been asking people to try and give me a word, an adjective, to give me some kind of vibe to work towards when I'm writing the piece. Can you think of anything that describes this and your feeling about this spot?
I like to think of the narrow sea as both shuck and slap. The shuck, the barrier part of it, and then the slap, which is the Ulster Scots word for an entrance to a field. So it's both shuck and slap. It's both a divider and an entrance, a doorway as well. Wands on bletherments, facettes, sup and hay, kicks the swoop bod times flip. Wild nice, bonny nice and heartsome. Lang sick gae on, duke about bull and flit. Aways not a hit about his work, nor so late nor blit. Like money's the one afore and after, through other merciless hame place, awa aff now, out of sight and forgot.
I love the idea of sangstour, the dusty traces of songs and poems drifting down the years. Tradition that can still be found if you bother to look. That wee weaver birdie flitting and flying put me in mind of the silver sound of an instrument once common in these parts, and into the unexpected company of an old friend. Nigel, I have to say, this is a great surprise. I know you as an accordion player. I never knew you played the dulcimer.
No, it's more a recent development. He surmised that it came in with the sailors and fishermen in around the coast.
Yeah.
I suppose it was a simple thing to make as well. You know, if you're out in the country and you didn't have much, you could make one at home. There was a dulcimer player in Glasgow, and in one of his interviews he said that Everybody made one because they couldn't afford anything else. And so they bought a coil of piano wire, and I think his was actually made off the coal shed door. And they got tuning pegs off an old piano that was broken and made their music. It's a lovely sound for something that's so simple.
Incredible. The accordion used to get called the same, the poor man's piano.
Yeah, I believe so.
Or what do they call it? The stomach Steinway. It would be some size of a Steinway on me these days. John Ray is an interesting character. He would be the dulcimer player back in the day that everybody knew about.
He would have been the main man as far as I was concerned, and played with the chieftains, and people came from all over, from America and everywhere to visit him. He was still playing after everybody else had stopped or passed away. He was playing right up to the finish in the early 80s.
Keeping it going.
Yeah, very much so.
It's a fascinating instrument, and it resonates so beautifully. And to hear reels and jigs played on it is unusual because there's this bed underneath it.
I always played, as John Ray would have said, the music of my country.
Yeah.
He played reels, jigs and hornpipes. I think the faster, punchier dance music really, it suits.
Are you guys aware of the Scottish connection here?
Any of the musicians that I would have played with when I started to play would have played a lot of Scottish music. And the older men, they played all the Irish music certainly, but there was a strong Scottish influence in it. Even in the style of playing, there was always a Scottish influence in it.
Migration has led to the sharing of our different traditions, but music has found other ways to cross the narrow sea.
Hello there, and a hearty welcome to you all as usual as we swing open the doors of the ballroom here at BBC Radio Scotland with the invitation indeed to take the floor.
Hello, and you're very welcome, folks. I'm Colin Sands, and I hope you can stay with me between now and 11 for another session of the very best of folk and traditional music.
A generation ago, radio waves carried music to coastal villages on both shores. Jimmy Shan's accordion, Sean Maguire's fiddle. Tradition and influence flowing back and forth like the tide.
Struck the follow with these catchy jigs, Barry's Leather Breeches, the Irish Washerwoman, Alan McPherson of Moss Park, and the Carlow.
You know, the longer I sit here, gazing back across the narrow sea towards Scotland, the more it affirms the feeling that I have of familiarity. It doesn't feel like I've stepped into a different country at all. It feels like I'm stepping into a reflection of where I just left. Nothing unfamiliar about it at all. It's almost as if you could take the two bodies of land and slide them together in the ocean so they fit like a jigsaw. Before a pioneering Scottish engineer opened up this coastal road in the 1830s, the people of North Antrim had lived as one community with their neighbours in Western Scotland. This new road meant a shift in perspective for the folk who lived here. But I can still feel Scotland over my shoulder as I travel on to one of the oldest landing points on the Antrim coast. Carrickfergus Castle stands at the mouth of Belfast Lough. William of Orange landed here in 1690, en route to victory at the Boyne. Just one of the many ambitious men to come here down the centuries. And I'm meeting another William now, to find out more about this castle's role in Ulster and Scotland's interconnected story. William, I really can't believe that I've never been here, given the number of times I've been in Ireland.
Well, this magnificent castle has stood sentinel over Belfast Lough for over 800 years, and in that time it has witnessed so many important events and episodes in our history. Carrickfergus was in many ways a seat of power for the Anglo-Norman earldom of Ulster. And as such, it was a place of immense military and strategic importance. And it's little wonder then that Carrickfergus was seen as such an important location during the Bruce invasion of Ireland.
Whatever possessed him to invade Ireland?
Well, in 1314 there had been the great victory of the Scots over the English at the Battle of Bannockburn, and Robert the Bruce was now in control of Scotland. And you might say in a strategic sense to try and create an alliance of forces around the English. In May 1315, his younger brother Edward sailed across to Ireland, landed with 6,000 men, and then made their way towards Carrickfergus Castle.
I have to say, I'm smiling away to myself at the notion of somebody coming to form an alliance with someone backed up by 6,000 soldiers.
And when Edward's army arrived in County Antrim, they made their way here. Now, they captured the town, but the castle held out, and the castle held out for quite a few months. This was a strong fortress. The people within the walls were in a secure position. However, over time, they became more desperate. They ran low on supplies. There's one account of them actually resorting to cannibalism and eating the dead bodies of captured Scottish prisoners. And eventually, the castle here was forced to surrender to the Scots. And in late 1316, Robert the Bruce himself came across to Carrickfergus to meet with his brother. It's believed that not long after Edward took the town of Carrickfergus, he was crowned or inaugurated King of Ireland by his Irish ally, so recognised as being the King of Ireland. So in a sense you have Robert as King of Scotland and his brother Edward for a short time as King of Ireland.
It's almost as if Scotland wasn't big enough for the two of them.
Now, the story ends badly for Edward. Eventually in 1318, he's killed in battle, and that really brings an end to the Scots' control of this part of Ireland.
As you know, I'm trying to compose a piece of music that's going to be influenced by my encounters over here. And I'm thinking about this building. You know, could you encapsulate the vibe and the ambience of this place?
Let's go back to over 700 years to 1316, when you've got the Normans defending the castle, and then outside you have Edward Bruce's Scottish army. The mood is changing very much. From the inside the castle, confidence, they're going to hold out, to getting nervous, anxious, desperate. And outside the walls, the Scottish army is probably thinking to themselves, you know, how are we ever going to capture this castle?
So kind of in a nutshell, it would be trepidation and fear on the inside, and aggression and confidence on the outside.
Yes.
I want to capture the heartbeat of history here, to help me imagine the different armies that have stood in this castle's shadow. And what better than a sound unique to Ulster? The thunder of a lambeg drum. There's some smack off of that.
There isn't half.
Even through the headphones. You know what fascinates me is that you've got the biggest instrument in the world and the smallest instrument in the world. That's the choice to pair them up.
Oh, aye. But you're Northern Ireland fella, remember that? We do daft things like that.
After this morning, I'll never forget. That tune you were playing, I mean, I recognise that as 100 pipers and all.
Yeah.
But it's a different timing at home.
Aye.
Ours is da-da-dun, da-dun, da-dee-da-dee-dun, dee-da-dun-da-dee-dee. And you've squared it into fours. Da-da-dun, dum, da-dee-dee-da-dee.
That's the rhythm of
See,
the drum, you see.
When we march, it's all about swinging the kilt.
Yeah.
It's got a bit more of a vibe, you know.
We talk about donner in here, you see. We're going for a wee donner, and as you say, we're just
wee donner.
wee donner along. And that rhythm, I mean, it still fits me. Your 6/8 jig rhythm, yeah, that's fine. But to drum a rhythm with that to the fife is slightly more difficult. Most of our rhythms that we would use would be reels and hornpipes, which we've adapted, maybe from jigs or other sort of pieces of music. But they fit the fife and they fit the drum.
So tell me, what is the history of the lambeg drum?
Well, we think it came with the mercenary army, with Prince of Orange, as he was then, who arrived here in 1690. Now, you have to imagine now, 300-400 years ago, what instruments did you have? One of those. Some like that, they are slightly smaller.
That's how your armies moved about. You know, you got them a step and you just marched, you use your drums, you use your fifes. I mean, the tradition still goes on here, obviously, and on the east coast of America as well. But the drum just kept getting bigger and bigger.
You know, you're playing together in unison, but I mean, you've got a hell of a job in your hands to get to be heard over and above this.
I am used to keeping this man under control.
The governor.
The boss.
The reason why the fife comes in first is because he's supposed to follow my rhythm, not the other way around, you know. So it's up to him to listen to me, not me to listen to him.
The thing is, Phil, the sound of the drum is coming out. The sound of the fife is coming up over the top. So I can hear him without any problem. And the register that he's playing in
is the upper register.
So
and even breaking into the higher harmonics.
Yes, absolutely.
No easy task. What about the key of that? Do they come in multiple keys, or is it kind of a fixed?
No, it's a fixed key. The closest key would be C sharp.
C sharp.
C sharp. Yeah.
That's an accordion player's nightmare.
Oh, absolutely. That's why you never see. Okay.
We'll never have a tune together.
Yes.
Isn't that sad?
Yes.
As you know, lads, I'm writing a piece of music about my encounters with stories and sounds over here. I'm trying to write a piece of music. So to that end, could I get a little sample of different drum hits?
All right. On different parts of the skin, just?
Different parts of the skin, just single hits.
Yeah.
And we'll start soft and then build it up.
Yep.
And I'm going to ask our sound man, Davey, here to come in and give me some backup. Just let me...
Normally we would go here in the middle of the drum. If we're going nice and light.
Okay, just give me a single strike.
A bit harder?
No, just as you were there. One more, please. Now give me a great big one. I was dangerously close to
something else.
Something else. I felt the wind of it coming past.
How do you incorporate that in a tune?
I'll take the note and the reverb of it. Maybe add it to a wave crashing.
Oh, yes.
You know what I mean? Just to maybe, you know, the front end of it, you hear that there's two sounds. There's the stick hitting the skin, which is the crack of it, and then you hear the body of the drum. So, you know, you've got all of that. If you take that front end away from it, you'll get a woo. So you're using the whole sound of the drum. Just past Carrickfergus, Belfast Lough opens to the North Channel, facing Glasgow on the farther shore.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Captain Casey Doyle speaking. On behalf of myself and all the officers of the crew, would like to welcome you all aboard the Descendants of Belfast 7 for this 11:30 sailing from Belfast to Lough Ryan.
Scottish coal and steel helped Belfast become an industrial powerhouse in the 19th century. Leviathans made their maiden voyages from these two shipbuilding cities, as industry and business forged strong links between them. That industrial golden age is long gone, but for the writer Jan Carson, the connections are still important, and the narrow sea is a source of inspiration.
When I come on the ferry this morning, I just had such a strong sense of, even the smell of it hasn't changed since the 1980s, and all of our childhood holidays started on this boat in our pyjamas at 6 o'clock, taking off to Scotland, and my first paddle in the sea, in this bit of sea, was actually on the Scottish side. I think I really love this stretch of water because it's such a liminal space. You know, when you're in a boat like we are today, you're kind of between one place and the next. And for me as a writer, that's an incredibly creative space. You've left something behind and you haven't quite arrived there yet.
The word liminal has evaded my vocabulary up until today.
I think when you're from the north of Ireland, liminal is a word they get used to quite quickly. Liminal is being between things and having that space to be lots of different things at the one time. To me, the creative potential in that, of not having the baggage of having to be everything, that you can pick and choose and be lots of different identities at one time.
Migration has always been a huge part of the story about Ulster and Scotland. And, you know, you imagine somebody packing up all their belongings and then they land over here in Antrim and they set up home, but they can still see where they came from. It might create issues of confusion as to where you belong.
You know, we think of belonging as a kind of fixed thing that you put your roots down and this is where you are. And yet for me, I travel a lot and I have begun to see belonging as something that is it's an open-ended term. You can belong in lots of places at once. And I have so many fond memories as a child and then an adult of making this journey across to Scotland. I can see the land on the other side. A little bit of me belongs over there as well. And I hear it in my accent every time I speak. There's a little bit of Scotch in there as well. I think you can belong in lots of places at once.
Yeah. As a writer, you convey your stories and your message through words. For me, it's a different thing. You know, I'm dealing with tempo and pitch and rhythm very much. Do you think that the words and the language of a country somehow help to dictate the rhythm of the music?
One of the lovely things about being from Northern Ireland is that, you know, you can throw a stone and hit 16 poets before it lands. And from the poets, I think particularly, I've learned a sense of rhythm where a sentence has to mean, but it also has to sing kind of music to them. I've stolen a lot of that from where I grew up and the way people told stories there. You know, in Ballymena, you go round the world to get to the point of a story. When you talk about Ulster-Scots with a hyphen in the middle, I very much feel part of both of those things. I'm an Ulster woman, but I also have a Scotch ancestry. And I always come back to that thing that John Hewitt, the poet, said about being an Ulster man of planted stock and a British man and an Irish man and a European. And to diminish one aspect of that identity is to diminish the whole. And I love that, and it's something that I will fight to the bit for, to be all things at once.
I've been trying to harvest ideas for this piece of music I'm writing and asking the people that I meet to try and sum up their feeling of the narrow sea and the story and give me a word to kind of hang on to incorporate in the piece.
I guess a body of water does two things. It either divides or it connects. And for me, this particular body of water connects. It's given me an early sense of affinity with Scotland. So this water to me is connection.
I've come home for a wee bit of thinking time to try and make some musical sense of all I've seen and heard so far. This particular theme I'm looking at today, in my mind, it's about people travelling to Ireland from Scotland in the very early days, arriving on the shore just as the sun is rising and thinking to themselves, what now? So it's a little inquisitive. Sunrise on the farthest shore. Okay, I've set up a little template on the computer and I'm going to try and make a quick sketch of that melody. And then I'm going to try and put some piano and other sounds behind it and see how we get on. Be a little click track so that I'm staying within the boundaries of the tempo. I wrote my first tune when I was, I think, 8, and I entered it into the own composition section at Blairgowrie Festival. 8 years old, yeah, and I'd been writing ever since. It's pretty much a requirement now. It's like being constipated. If it doesn't come out, you don't feel very well. So many families in Northern Ireland can follow their story back to the movement of people out of Scotland in the early 17th century. I've learned a bit about the thousands of lowland folk who left in hopes of a better future than Scotland could offer. But as that century unfolded, Ulster also became a land of refuge for religious fugitives, who refused to put the king's authority before their own covenant with their lord.
Basically, Covenanters and the Scottish army were having a struggle across the southwest of Scotland. And this escalated and spiralled into increasing violence on each side. It was quite disconcerting, I think, for the sort of general Presbyterian part of the population, because these were pretty godly people who were being executed, even if they did hold quite militant views. So in that environment, people were trying to get across the North Channel as a place of refuge, as a place of safety. They were trying to get out of Scotland, where there was repression of Presbyterians, the Covenanters who escaped to Ireland. There were people looking for a sort of safe bolt hole to get out of the country. But actually, one of the things you were not supposed to do as a militant Covenanter was to leave. You were supposed to stay and suffer in Scotland, because that would be a testimony against the regime, and that would please God.
Would it be fair to say that the people that left and crossed the narrow sea would be refugees?
In some senses, they are refugees. In other ways, they are just fugitives avoiding Scots law. And so Ireland was a place of safety, a place of refuge, where if you're a Presbyterian, you could go there and live quietly.
I've written a piece of music called The Farther Shore, which is, in my mind, is about them arriving in Ulster. And I wonder, what did they think? It's like, what now? Where did they go? And how did they settle? Because I imagine it wasn't pre-planned.
I think when people fled Scotland during the Celtic times, they fled to, basically their kin. Because for many years before that, a large number of Scots had moved to Ulster. They were landing, in some senses, in quite a comfortable spot for them in comparison to what was going on back in Scotland.
Beyond the Covenanters that fled across the narrow sea, people continued for other reasons to move across.
Oh, they certainly did. And one of the biggest drivers of that was famine, and what's called the 7 ill years in Scotland, which is in the 1690s, from about 94 onwards. Now, the name's actually biblical. It wasn't really quite 7 years. But Scotland was an agricultural community, and most people lived in the countryside. And it was actually quite small and local, but when famine struck, when they had bad harvests, now Scotland could cope with like one bad harvest, but in the 7 ill years, they had repeated bad harvests. And these brought a crisis in rural Scotland, where 1 in 10 are sort of estimated to have died of famine. There were people dying in the roads. There was a refugee camp in Edinburgh. It was really bad, and it just overwhelmed the Scottish state. And so people saw Ireland across the narrow sea as basically a place to go. And so people moved across that channel to get there. So it really is a sort of mass exodus.
I mean, that would have altered the shape of Ireland completely.
Yes, it would. The Scots had already been going there from the Ulster plantation onwards. So there were Scots, and an increasing Scots community. But it's probably the biggest single shift of Scots in just a few years across that channel.
When you hear the news these days about the movement of people, migrants crossing the Med in overcrowded boats or held in a camp at Calais, it's very easy to lose sight of individual stories behind the headlines, to forget they are ordinary families who felt forced out by hardship or persecution or politics. Imagine if you were coming over with all you had and all you held dear in a wee boat with maybe want or danger behind you and uncertainty on the other side. The water between these two shores must have felt really wide. There's an old tradition common on both shores that I wanted to capture. Pipers playing in sea caves to amplify the music and give it even greater power. It seems appropriate that Glenn's chosen a Scottish folk tune that later became a hymn to send out across the water today. strange thing to be recording. The sound of crabs scuttling in a crate. I see this is a first for me. I wanted the sounds of a working boat, the greedy gulls that follow the fishing, the smack of the waves on the hull, the clatter of the creels as the sea's bounties hauled aboard. All just part of the daily soundscape for the folk who work this water.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
We'll keep that one.
It's such a beautiful colour of blue, the lobster. You know, when I think of a lobster, I think of it presented red on the plate. Do you think there's a camaraderie between fishermen on both sides of the narrow sea, or is it still a bit of a competition?
It's a funny thing. There's the two intertwined. There's the comradeship. Any fisherman at all will help any other fisherman, no questions asked. But there is that competitiveness too. It's legendary. Lobstermen, they're worldwide known for telling lies. If you have a box of lobsters today, once you go ashore, well, how'd you do today? Oh, at 5 the size, not too good. But at the same time, if you need anything, I'll do whatever I can to help you, but not give you my information.
So he's emptied all of these pots and he's just going to reset them off the back of the boat, 10 of them on the line. Do you think there would have been almost a mirror image on the Scottish side of the sea? Would the styles of fishing been different, or would it have been very similar?
Very, very similar. Battling the same elements, battling the wind, the tides, trying to get the best fishing grounds. You face the same adversities, you face the same challenges. Now we're so blessed. Technology is a wonderful thing and you have to embrace it in many ways, but you have to admire fishermen years ago with wind and tide and the old sayings which are still ring through and you still
red
hear.
Sky at night, shepherd's delight.
Exactly, sailor's delight.
Sailor's delight, of
sailor's
course,
delight.
Okay.
Red sky in the morning, sailor's warning.
Is that still a good thing to go by? A good indication?
The old ways are the best ways.
Aye.
A wise old fisherman said to me one time, he wasn't very old, he says, you fish the good fine days, young fella, and the bad days look after themselves. And it was very wise words, so it was.
Fishing the fine days and doing what you could to weather the storms of life was a common experience for the communities clinging to the shore on both sides of the narrow sea. The Scots who settled along the coast in County Down would have made their living mostly from fishing and work in small farms, something that didn't change much down the years. The village of Portavogie is closer to Scotland than it is to Belfast, their way of life shaped by the sea. This community was bound together through hardship, kinship, and a faith that sustained them through good days and bad. Oh, this fairly takes me back. There are wee halls like this all over Scotland, very familiar sight. I used to play organ on a Sunday morning in a church. Not unlike this, I have to say. The cushions are a nice touch. You get a very different sense of history in a place like this. Stories of quieter lives, a way of praying and singing and even talking.
Sometimes the wee moments are more important than the big moments. Our folk, we know, were here in about 1750, because that's when the local Presbyterian Church records record them as Thompson's Ballyfrench, 1750.
Can you set up our location, just exactly where we are geographically?
Well, this is what I sometimes call the Far East, because this is the most easterly point of all of the island of Ireland. We're right on the edge of County Down and the Ards Peninsula.
When you get up in the morning and you go for a dander with the dog and you look out east, what is it that you see?
A dander with a dog. The Mull of Galloway. The Mull of Galloway is a constant landmark in my mind and my eyes and my heart as well, because whenever the roller blind went up on the kitchen window when I was a wee fella, that was what you looked for. You wanted to see if Scotland was visible. Sometimes it's completely invisible, but in an hour's time it'll be back there again. When you live in a coastal community, you always want to go across to the other side and have a wee joke about, see
Have a
what's
nosy.
there. And, but I think that's common to the human experience. And when you live on a coast, you can see over there. You're not going to a far distant land, you're just going over there.
Do you think that deep down the sense of missing home stayed with the Scottish people that came to live here?
I don't think that they necessarily felt they were leaving home, because it's so easy to get back. You know, even in those old 1600s manuscripts, it says that the journey took 3 hours. Well, if you get on a ferry in Belfast and sail to Cairnryan today, it'll take you about 3 hours. And the wonderful thing about that, of course, is that you're not going to America. You're not going to the other side of the world. So, you know, if life here doesn't work out for anybody, you can be back home tomorrow morning if you want to be. But it was a hard life. Nobody came here for an easy time. And sometimes I think that maybe the Hamiltons and Montgomerys who persuaded them to come over, maybe some of them were checking the small print afterwards, because it didn't look like much of a paradise when they turned up, but they made a life of it.
Was faith important in the community, and was that faith brought here by the Scots?
Well, the folk who came were overwhelmingly Presbyterian. They'd been through the Scottish Reformation. And faith has been a very important thing here throughout the centuries. The world that I grew up in, though, wasn't big churches, and it wasn't even Presbyterian churches. It was the wee halls. And those wee gospel halls and mission halls that dot the peninsula, a lot of those were inspired by folk evangelists and faith mission people who were coming from Scotland. Popular hymns rather than unaccompanied psalms. And lots of those hymns have seafaring imagery and metaphors written into them, which shouldn't be a surprise, because the focus of that faith, you know, Jesus Christ lived around the shores of the Sea of Galilee, and loads of his disciples were fishermen. You know, he had called them from the sea.
Brightly beams our Father's mercy from his lighthouse evermore, but to us he gives the keeping of the lights along the shore. Let the lower lights be burning, send a gleam across the waves. Some poor fainting, struggling seaman, you may rescue, you may save.
Mull of Galloway to Mull of Kintyre, including the Firth of Clyde in North Channel.
I heard a rumour or two that the fishermen used to share hymns with each other over the airwaves. You know, maybe if they were stuck out in bad weather, that they would comfort each other by singing hymns to each other. Is that the truth, do you think?
Aye, it is. That's been handed down through the generations. Because music is a great way of bonding folk. With song, I mean, music gives life to words. And when you can put a tune to words, it's something that you can then share with other folk. And you're not just singing by yourself, but you're singing with others. And whether that's on a radio in the dead of night out there somewhere, or whether that's in a wee hall and everybody's, you know, standing up and their lungs are full of air, you know, Phil, music is a wonderful thing.
Dark the night of sin has settled, loud the angry billows roar. Eager eyes are watching, longing for the lights along the shore. Let the lower lights be burning, send a gleam across the way. Some poor fainting, struggling seaman, you may rescue, you may save.
You know, I'm trying to write a piece of music about my experiences and encounters here. And I've been asking people to give me a word that could sum up their feeling of the place that we're in. What would your word be for this?
It would probably be something like flow, because the tide comes and goes twice a day. Folk come and go on the tide. And that's the thing that connects us and allows us to share things in both directions. So something like that.
I'll take that and I'll carry it with me along with the other words on the next step of this journey. Thanks very much. Well, I started at the shortest point between Scotland and Northern Ireland with no real map of the way ahead. But now I have a head full of sounds and pictures. Wave speech and bird screech, lighthouses and laughter, pipes and drums, hymns and history echoing across the water, the ebb and flow of people. I've already got wee rhythms and snatches of melody racing around inside my brain. The stories and the sounds that I picked up along the way, they're like points to help me navigate or to guide me between these two shores and the music that I set out to find here. I guess my course is set. Time to get my hand on the oar. See you on the other side. Next time, more sounds and stories from the farther shore. There's a rhythm track if ever I heard one. And the part I both love and dread in equal measure. Are you hearing us, Portavogie? Translating it all into dots on a page. That's a Lambeck drum. I'll use it as individual hits in a rhythm track. A few rollicks. And hoping that the music will take flight.